Well, thank you for that warm welcome. And I particularly want to thank Professor Lucy for inviting me to do a lecture on business ethics, because that gives me an opportunity to talk about Adam Smith, okay? So, and I must say, I've had a wonderful visit here so far. Met many members of the faculty and students, and they're very excited about their work and their teaching, and they've been telling me about it. It's fun, okay, thank you. Well, David Hume, in his essay on who we are as humans, okay, in 1740, he distinguished between what he called disinterested commerce and interested commerce. Well, now the first refers to our tendency toward caring and other regarding behavior toward our family, extended family, friends, neighbors. It's our intimate social groups. And the second, what he called interested commerce, refers to our own regarding behavior in market transactions and with others. So actually the second grew out of the first. Trade is just an extension of human sociality. It's not anything very dramatically different. And all kinds of people love to shop, okay? Well, Adam Smith wrote a book on each of these two topics, okay? The first, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in 1759. This book was about the emergence of human sociability and about the rules we follow that kind of emerged spontaneously in humans. And he's talking about a world of pre-civil society, okay, before there's government, or at least very strong government. And then secondly, he wrote The Wealth of Nations. Now, it's pretty clear, and many biographers have pointed this out about Adam Smith, he considered the first book his most important work. And indeed, he not only wrote that book first, but he revised it 5 times. The last time was in 1790. And he did a major revision of it and added 2 new sections to that book. So it was in a way his first and enduring love. And that book was very well received at the time. But already by 1790, which is when he finished his 6th edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and Adam Smith died in that year, already by that time he was really known as the author of The Wealth of Nations. And I think the first book was eclipsed by just the spectacular success of his second book. And The Wealth of Nations was not only known by scholars and academics, it was known by statesmen, public figures. William Pitt the Younger knew The Wealth of Nations quite well, and he was Prime Minister of Britain for 17 years. I have a great quote from Adam Smith. After he met William Pitt the Younger, his comment at the dinner table was that he understands my system better than I do. So that'll give you an idea of the enormous impact you see this man had on the leadership of the time. And here's I particularly want to show you here the subtitle of The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It's an essay towards an analysis of the principles by which men naturally judge concerning the conduct and character, first of the neighbors and afterwards of themselves. In one sentence, that tells you what it's all about. It's about coming to see ourselves as others see us. You know, that's the famous poem by Bobby Burns about seeing ourselves as others see us. Bobby Burns was a contemporary of Adam Smith. He died very young, 37, but they would have overlapped in Edinburgh. Okay, well, why studying Adam Smith here in the 21st century? Well, in the first place, his first book is a model of human conduct that I find that seamlessly connects action in social groupings with that in markets. So it's not as if a person is of two minds. It's the same person, and he's able to, I think, make that connection and show us how they're connected, I think, more clearly than a lot of modern writers. He offers propositions that predict action where standard models of economics fail. They didn't fail just a little bit, they failed massively in the 1990s. Now we're going to apply these propositions to some laboratory trust games. It also offers propositions that suggest and predict action in unique new experimental designs, and I'm going to show you some of those. And what we've done, I think, is just the beginning. It's a rich source of motivation for examining new issues in the laboratory. And it connects human conduct in experimental games to broad social themes of property, beneficence, and justice in stable societies. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Well, let me begin by talking about what Sentiments is not about. Because if you enter Theory of Moral Sentiments as an economist, a lot of things you read, you will interpret in ways that is not what Adam Smith is talking about, and it takes a while. I don't know how many times I had entered the Theory of Moral Sentiments and read it and involved in discussions about it before I began to think like he did, okay? And the process is not about kind of the way we think of decision-making in modern economics. We think of an action as leading to an outcome, and that outcome has subjective value to the actor. And so we get right away into finding ways in which people, things to maximize, okay, in order to explain human behavior. However, and I'm going to come back to this because it sounds like a contradiction at first, Smith assumed common knowledge of self-love, as he called it, or self-interest. He said everyone is self-loving. And moreover, you find that assumption is essential. That's how we know who benefits and who's hurt by our actions. It's because we know that we implicitly know that people prefer more or less, okay? It's not about altruism. In fact, that word is not even in the English language for another 100 years after Adam Smith wrote. And nearest to it is Hutchinson. Francis Hutchinson was a very distinguished professor at Glasgow University and was Adam Smith's teacher. And it's not about reason or the social contract, for example, Hobbes. And in fact, Adam Smith says that many of the rules we follow are efficient. He uses the word efficacious. They're efficacious. They do work. But that's not why we follow those rules. Because he was interested in what our basic motivation was. Even if, by reason, you can show that these rules are efficient and welfare improving. It's Sentiments is also not about what's called social preferences. And economists, both behavioral and experimental economics now today, talk a lot about social preferences. As my colleague Bart Wilson says, social preferences aren't preferences. That's a contradiction in terms. Sociality is about relationships. So, by social preferences, what a lot of people mean by that is the notion that in an individual's valuation function, utility function, is not only their own outcome, but the outcome of others they're relating to. That's not the way Adam Smith thinks about it. And I hope to show you sort of how that works. And also there's pitfalls in that approach that I want to try to bring out. Okay, so what is sentiments about? Well, it's about human sociality as other regarding conduct. And the word conduct, you see, suggests patterns of behavior rather than just individual instances. Sentiments is about rule following conduct, and particularly the propriety and fitness, you see, of those rules that we follow. There's a marvelous mental experiment that Adam Smith asked us to consider in the theory of moral sentiments, which I think gives you an idea of what his thinking is. He says, imagine an individual growing up in complete isolation, never having any communication with another member of the species. He says that person can no more have a sense of what it means to have a deformed mind than having a deformed face. He says, raise him in society and you give him the mirror he needs. Now that metaphor, that powerful metaphor, if you understand that, you can begin to get a handle on everything he's talking about, because he sees every individual as a product of a social environment that's brought up in. People always, as you grow up, everyone is always marking their approval or disapproval, you see, of your actions. And that becomes now who we are as young people and then adults. Rules, thirdly here, rules emerge by consent, and they become conventions, or today we often call them norms. Sentiments is about accounting for social order in pre-civil society. Adam Smith looked around him. In Northern Europe, there's all of these groups that are very orderly. Okay, there's maybe conflict and wars between different in-groups. Okay, but the in-groups are very orderly and sort of no one is in charge of producing the rules that people follow by. Those emerge kind of spontaneously. And today we call it a spontaneous order. We use that language. Both sympathy and mutual both sympathy and what Adam Smith called mutual sympathetic fellow feeling are important in the theory of moral sentiment. Today we would call sympathetic fellow feeling when we use the word empathy. Well, that word didn't come in until 150 years after he wrote. Equilibrium. If there's a concept of equilibrium in Adam Smith, it exists in rule space, not outcome space. When he uses the word fair, he means fair play, talking about rules, fair play according to rules. The opposite of fair is foul, okay, to violate the rules. Actions are signals conveying our intentions in conduct. People constantly reading the actions that other people take in terms of judging people's intentions, you see. And that's, of course, often ambiguous, of course, and there's error in that, but that's what it's all about. And the meaning of actions is read sort of imperfectly from context. It's not only the action that you take, but the action you didn't take that helps the person to see kind of what intentions may have been. And then finally, an important, very important point is that what Adam Smith calls propriety evolved into property in the civil order. So the idea is, think of humans as living a long time in small groups. These rules of propriety develop. It's natural in a more organized order with government to move those rules into that world. Now here's a brief summary of sort of the main axioms and principles of conduct as you find them in Adam Smith. And because the print's smaller, I have to use another pair of glasses, okay? Stay with me. And notice my print tends to be quite large. That's so I can read it. Okay. Now, the fundamental axiom in the theory of moral sentiments is self-love. Okay? And also non-satiation. More is always better. Okay? And that's common knowledge. And for each, more is better, less is worse or hurtful. But in our maturation process, in becoming social, quote, we humble the arrogance of our self-love to bring it down to what others will go along with. He uses the phrase, go along with, 41 times. Okay? He wants you to get it. He talks about actions that people will or will not go along with. Mankind will or will not go along with. The impartial spectator will or will not go along with. So that's coming up over and over. And he also, this is not a direct quote, but he says in effect that you cannot look your neighbor in the face. We're all self-loving, but you cannot look your neighbor in the face and avow that all your decisions are driven by self-love. Okay? And we want to be able to look our neighbors in the face. All right. Secondly, human desire, that is motivation for conduct, is inseparable from our sociality, and it has two major dimensions. One is on the gain domain, the betterment side of things, and that involves our desire for praise, but also to be praiseworthy. We like to be praiseworthy even though no one knows about our actions and knows that it's praiseable. And those are both, they're related, but they're both inputs, you see, in the gain domain. On the loss domain, there's this desire to avoid blame and blameworthiness. And he doesn't just assume that this gain-loss asymmetry exists. He derives it from an asymmetry, a fundamental asymmetry between our joy and our sorrow. And anyone reasonably situated, he says, has far more to lose than to gain. And the losses, it isn't just our income or wealth, it's also esteem, reputation, how others view it. All of those are at stake if we have a major loss. And then think of actions as signals shaped by their propriety. And these are always driven by particular circumstances. That's how we read the context. Now, circumstances include payoffs. Payoffs are in there. Rewards are in there. They allow intentions are conveyed in our actions, if these signals, if be sent and read in terms of what we're thinking and sending them, and others in reading them. And of course, this needn't be in anything like a deliberate self-aware process. In fact, we do it all the time without even having to think about it. We're such social creatures. I think of equilibrium as involving harmony or resonance in rule space. And Smith uses words like harmony, resonance, discord, that sort of thing. And discord motivates adjustment. Now, I want to give you I've noted here this homeless man to remind myself, I want to tell you of a personal experience I had that I was able to relate to what Adamson is talking about, that actually helped me to understand and appreciate in a kind of a different way as to what he's talking about. Candace and I lived part of the year in Tucson, Arizona. In fact, we lived there for many years when I was at the University of Arizona. And it's a pleasant winter climate, so there's lots of homeless people migrate into Tucson. In the suburbs, a homeless person will occupy an island. You see, you have a major intersection, and you've got 4 islands in the center there. And you will see homeless people, one homeless person on a particular island, and he's selling newspapers. All right? Well, there was this familiar figure, always on the same island. They have property rights, I can assure you. And the same person is always on the same island. I don't know how that works, but be sure that out of that group there's a property rights system, okay, that's respected. And so I would occasionally buy a newspaper from him. Well, I really don't read newsprint anymore. I like to read on my computer, okay? So I pulled over and rolled down the window, and he comes over to bring me a newspaper. And well, a newspaper is $2, and I have a $5 bill. I hand him the $5 bill. He reaches with his left hand to take the bill, and with his right hand, he's offering the newspaper. And I said, "That's all right. You can keep the newspaper." He said, "I only sell newspapers." And he pulled his hand back from keeping the $5 bill. Fortunately, I recovered. I got it right away. I realized what this was all about, and I said, "That's okay, I'll take the paper." And our eyes met, we smiled, and we had a transaction. So, this guy's a businessman. And it's okay for me to give him $5 for a $2 paper, but it's not okay for me to refuse the newspaper. And you see, and imagine that he would think of, well, gee, maybe I'll take the $5 this time. And as I was thinking, he can sell the newspaper to somebody else. Suppose he did that. He's not being true to himself. Okay, right away, he's corrupted himself and his own image and everything. So, a few months later, my wife and I were in the supermarket right next to that island, and it was about 3:30 in the afternoon. So he was pretty much finished. He was talking to some high school students in there, which was high school, the high school that just let out. And Candace, my wife, said, "You know, he doesn't look very good. I think I'll give him $5. I said, "Don't." I said, "Ask him if he's got a newspaper." So she did. And he says, "Oh, yes." He says, "I have some out." I said, "I'll go out and get it." So he went out and got a newspaper. And he brings it back. And he says, "Some of my customers want yesterday's newspaper." So so I always save some and carry them home. This guy is taking care of his customers. He's satisfying his customers. So don't confuse him with other people that might be on some island. Okay, I want to consider the following, and this is a new trust game that we've we've done a number now of trust games that have been motivated by this Adam Smith. And this is between anonymously paired individuals. So imagine you're in a room with maybe a dozen or 16 people, and you're one of the persons. So imagine that you're person one, and you've been randomly matched with another person in the room, and you each have your own separate computer screens, and you're private and separated from each other. So if person one who moves first plays right, the game is over, and each are paid $12 separately and independently and privately. Okay? If one passes to two, notice that the $24 becomes $48. Well, think of that being because there's some synergy between these two individuals. Okay, one may be an investor and the other an inventor or something. So there's some gains here from their interaction. So the $24 become 48. Now, two can either share it $18 for one and $30 for himself. Now, notice two is giving one a 50% increase and taking a 150% increase for themselves, or two can take most all the money, all but $6. Okay, the first version of this game we did many years ago, two could take all the money. Turns out the payoffs make some difference, but the general conduct that we observe in these games is very much the same. Okay, now here's this is called an extensive form game. One moves first, two sees one's move and then moves. Okay. Okay, what's the traditional extensive form analysis? Well, first, it's assumed that common knowledge that all players are strictly self-interested and non-satiated. Second, only own payoff outcomes matter in choosing an action. You apply backward induction to the tree. One looks ahead and sees what two would do, and then asks what is in the best interest for him to do. And of course, the game is played in a reverse sequence of the forward in the tree. So notice as the player one passes to player two, the latter is motivated to move down. So player one's best strategy is to move right, which is the equilibrium of the game. So the prediction is that one's move right. Well, here's this game, and the results are kind of similar to similar games that we ran very early. And notice here, so what we have here, this is for 49 pairs, and the person's won in each of those pairs. 22 of them move right, that's 45%, and 27, 55% move down. The twos, 2/3 have moved right, 1/3 do what we would call defect. So these kinds of outcomes are very, very typical in this game. Let's look at this from a point of view. Well, notice here that this standard self-interested action model failed. But here's a proposition in sentence that indicates why 2/3 of player twos do not take all the money and why so many player ones might pass the money. We call it beneficence proposition 1. It doesn't have a name in Adam Smith. It's on page 78. He says actions are a beneficent tendency which proceed from proper motives seem alone to require reward, because such alone are the approved objects of gratitude. Well, now notice, this can't be badly motivated. This guy is only going to take a 50% increase, and he's offering 150. So, by that proposition, Smith would predict that a generous number of people, twos, will cooperate. Now let's see how Adam Smith now would, using his system, how he would analyze this game. First, same assumption. Common knowledge that all players are strictly self-interested and non-satiated. Okay, just the same. Action, and notice all of this goes in terms and sentiments. It all has to do with issues like benefit or hurt, inferred intentions, imagining the other person's role as part of seeing ourselves as others see it. And also self-command. Self-command has to do with learning not to be tempted. Okay, to take both the money and keep the paper to sell someone else. And in the marginal moment, it's very easy to do that, okay? Action is determined by who is hurt or benefits from an action, and an inference of intent. Things like hurt, benefit, and intent are inferred from the opportunity cost of action taken. And by opportunity cost, we mean what the economists mean, the action you could have taken but didn't take. And there's this idea that intentional beneficence leads to gratitude, leads to reward. The other side of that is intentional hurt generates resentment and a desire to punish, to retaliate against the evil that was done. So now apply backward induction to the game tree to determine who is hurt or benefits from an action at each node, and the judge intends. So that's what we do. So each player, what Adam Smith calls the impartial spectator, imagines herself in the role of the other in judging intent and probable responses. And then forward play is what we call a signaling game. It's a conversation that conveys intent. And this is what facilitates, sort of thing that facilitates coordination. People have good feelings about each other. And of course, you don't even know who you're matched with in this game. And it's an open issue when we first did these as to whether a cooperation you see had any chance of surviving this anonymity. So if player one would cooperate in the player two role, the question for player one is, will player two see it in the same way if given an opportunity to act? So will player two cooperate given this unambiguous signal of player one's beneficent action? Well, notice here we have knowing the action, player two, knowing the action of player one, you see, already knows that one had moved down and he makes this choice. So basically two-thirds of the population we're sampling are consistent with this notion that they're reading the game. You see, they're seeing the other person as probably being like them, if we assume that the people in assigned to one have the same characteristic, but fewer of them are moving down, that arises because one is uncertain about player two's type. Okay, is he another person like me or not? So we see there's a slippage here of 12% depending upon which of these positions you were in because of the uncertainties that one faces about two. So now I want to show you some new trust games motivated by propositions and sentiments. Now here's another, what we call beneficence proposition 2. Smith says, beneficence is always free. It cannot be extorted by force. The mere want of it exposes to no punishment, because the mere want of beneficence tends to don't know the real positive evil. So Smith is saying in trust games like this, we should not expect player 2s to feel resentment or be willing to incur costs to punish player 1 for choosing not to be beneficent. Okay? That's sort of their respected right. That's the way Adam Smith sees the way we are. Okay? So, here's a trust game, a modification of the first trust game that tests that proposition. It's the same game. But now, if one chooses not to cooperate, but to move right, to go for the $12, play passes to 2. 2 now chooses between the 12, or 2, and at a $2 cost to himself, punish 1 for not playing down. Now notice the option that we added is dominate. In traditional analysis, you eliminate dominated options because no one would play them. But we're in a world where those dominated options are the essence of what people are doing and communicating and dealing with each other. So they're integral to the analysis. So meaning can depend upon all options, including the dominated, and eliminate it. All right, here's the results on the right. We ran 25 pairs, and 15 of them moved right to 2. None of them incurred the $2 cost to punish 1. They paid the $12. So, Adam Smith here is batting 1,000%. But notice that now play changes among the nodes. We now have more people. There's 60%. On the left, you see the baseline. The percentage moving right goes up from 45% to 60%. And also, if for the ones who play down, 2s are doing a lot more, proportionally, a lot more punishment. So the whole perception of this game is influenced by just adding one node. And no wonder that Adam Smith says over and over again that context is everything in terms of how we read each other. Okay, we couldn't believe these results. You almost always you do an experiment, you're testing a hypothesis, and there's some people that are going to not confirm the hypothesis at all. So we ran 13 more pairs. Okay, we're still getting 0 punishment. All right, here's justice, proposition 1. Adam Smith says, actions of a hurtful tendency which proceed from improper motives, meaning you intended it, seem alone to deserve punishment because such alone are the approved object of resentment. So suppose player 2 defects on the offer of player 1 to cooperate. And then this proposition predicts that many player 1s feel resentment and are willing to incur costs to punish player 2. And so this is the augmentation of the game on the left in the form that appears on the right. Suppose that we allow 2. If 2 decides not to cooperate, play passes back to 1. 1 now can play the defection outcome, 6-42, or he can at a cost to himself punish that. And Adam Smith predicts that people will feel resentment from this and are willing to incur that cost. Okay. Now, In sentiments, justice proposition 1 is the key to the origin of property. Okay? Common feelings of resentment toward improperly motivated, that is intentionally hurtful action in our close-knit communities is the origin of the civil order of law and a punishment proportioned to resentment. Smith says, as the greater and more irreparable the evil that is done, the resentment of the sufferer runs naturally to higher. And he also, there's a section where he talks about proportion. The kind of punishment in proportion to the hurt. Now, sentiments combines this proposition with asymmetry, the asymmetry of gains and losses that is developed in sentiments, to explain differential penalties applied to loss of property under law in nation states. He says, death is the greatest evil which one man can inflict upon another. Murder, therefore, is the most atrocious of all crime. To be deprived of that which we are possessed of is a greater evil than to be disappointed of what we had only the expectation. Breach of property, therefore, theft and robbery, which take from us what we are possessed of, are greater crimes than breach of contract, which only disappoints us of what we expected. So he explains, with this asymmetry between gains and losses, he explains why theft and robbery are criminal, whereas a violation of contract is simply a civil, it deals with a civil infraction. And we're, of course, under violation of contract, we're entitled to compensation if we're able to prove the damage and this sort of thing, but they're much different things. So he gets kind of big picture conclusions out of these basic principles. He says the most sacred laws of justice, therefore, those which violations seem to call loudest for vengeance and punishment, are the laws which guard the life and person of our neighbor. The next are those which guard his property and possessions, and last of all come those which guard what are called personal rights, or what is due to him from the promises of others. And then here's the justice proposition 2, and this is just the obverse of beneficence proposition 2. He says, though the breach of justice exposes the punishment, the observance of the rules of that virtue seems scarce to deserve any reward. So he's telling you that there are no rewards for stopping at a red light. That's your duty. Okay? There's no rewards for not disturbing your neighbor. And these are your duty under rule of law. And as want of beneficence is not subject to punishment, so just action, that is want of injustice, is not subject to reward. So you see the symmetry here between justice proposition 2 and beneficence proposition 2. So under the rule of law, classical liberal heritage, as Smith developed it, justice is a residue. It's what's left over after introducing penalties to try to limit unjust action. Society does good by discouraging the bad. And I think there's a very good reason for this. We're all more likely to agree on what's hurtful and what's bad. And it comes out of our history and our experience. So we can agree on that and introduce rules to try to limit those things. But everybody's got a different idea as to what is good to do in the future. And there's a lot of uncertainty about that. There's unintended consequences. So he sees the primary purpose of justice is to limit the bad, not try to produce good. Well, here's testing justice proposition 2. Well, Adam Smith here is beating. Only got 700 now. Notice here that we just added here. To test that, we add a node So if two decides to play the cooperative outcome at 1830, one, if he feels really warm and great gratitude for this, he can actually transfer $2 of his own payoff to and in fact, we're getting 3 people doing that. So, and this is a small sample, and we've just started this, but it gives you an idea here of kind of what we're up to. Okay, now let me talk here a little bit about sentiments in the Wealth of Nations and bring these together. Now, in the Wealth of Nations, property is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. That is, he assumes that in wealth and as part of the system that he talks about that brings about the wealth of nations. In addition, he needs an important axiom. I call it the axiom of discovery. It's the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. The exchange here is an expression of human sociology, human interested commerce. Now, so wealth of nation defines a discovery process. Exchange leads to prices, and prices facilitate comparisons. You've got a farmer growing corn and hog. He now finds, given prices, that it may be in his interest to grow more corn and less hog. He can make a calculation. He can do things he wouldn't have thought about doing before those prices exist. So in Smith's world, specialization is something that people discover. And we tend to have, for decades, we have tended to teach economics as if there's all this specialization out there, all these possibilities, and the job of markets is to aggregate that information so people get slotted in to the right position. That's not the way that Adam Smith sees it. He sees that starting with this change, and then over a person's experience, gradually making alterations, and then in the end, see more and more specializations. And now the first blind man experiments, you see, seem magical in finding equilibrium with only private information. We thought that was incredible because everybody was in the 50s and 60s believed that something like a supply and demand equilibrium people couldn't actually find it unless they had complete information. The theorist needed complete information. If he didn't have complete information, he couldn't compute it. And so you couldn't imagine how real people could find it unless they also had complete information. That was all wrong. Okay? We didn't naturally think in terms of process. And then finally here, this is a summary chart, and I'm sorry that it may be a little, here the print may be a little bit too difficult for you to see. But, and so we have humans who have this capacity for sentiment in the pre-civil society. And in that society, sentiments enable them to generate fellow feeling, the pleasures of mutual sympathy, and to experience, learn, self-command, conduct, the rules of propriety. That in turn, over on the right, leads to human social psychological betterment. In the central, the down arrow, we go from propriety to property. The rules of propriety become the rules of property, and the axiom of truck, barter, and exchange, and we start to get wealth creation. And that wealth creation in turn leads to human economic betterment. So first we have human social, psychological betterment, and then followed by human economic betterment. The two worlds that Hume referred to as disinterested and interested commerce. And then, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, here's a couple of references for papers that discuss these issues.
Thank you very much for this fascinating combination of an analysis, both of Smith and its historical theory, as well as the modern game theory and experiments. So this combination is so fascinating. We now have time for some questions. Yes. Maybe if you come down.
Yes, and you'll have to speak up because I don't hear much better than I see here.
I got a question.
Yes.
You have to go back to slides a little bit.
Sure.
Slide number 10.
I'll let you know when to stop.
Should be an 18, not a 7.
You want me to go back to the beginning?
No, not the beginning, just like the last model you showed us, like the last game. The next one, please. The next one where player 1 has the choice of rewarding the player 2.
Oh, you mean?
The 1632.
Yeah, this is where one is sweetening the reward at a cost to himself.
Have you tried to do it as like 1832, so which means like player 1 is not losing anything by, rewarding player 2?
No, this is our first entry into this, and look, clearly these choices are going to be influenced by the cost as well as the benefit. The basic game that I started with is actually pretty robust with respect to changes in the payoffs. I mean, you get 50% or more playing right, and typically of twos, about 2/3 cooperating, okay? But when you get to other parts of the game, it may very well be more sensitive to those payoffs. And that deserves to be explored because that's all part of the circumstances that influence how people read the game and their willingness to take positions in it. Okay.
So we had another question here.
Professor?
Yes.
In the aftermath of the last financial crisis, you were among the main critics of the American European bailouts programs and you recently manifest that you're also against the bailout of the Deutsche Bank in case of bankruptcy or anything like that.
Yes.
And would that be related to the justice proposition, like society is not encouraging that?
The question in here is about, in the United States, the federal government bailed out the 3 largest banks. And Deutsche Bank, the question of their position has started to come up here, and he's asking me if it's related to this. Well, it might be, but I'm not thinking quite in those terms. Because my book with Stephen Gierstad on rethinking housing bubbles, we think that most people, of course, reacted very negatively in retrospect effect, the bailout of the large banks. They saw it as very unfair. Well, no doubt what it is unfair, okay, in the sense that different rules for different people. But to us, what was much more serious is that it rescued investors had taken risks, okay? The risks had not more, they went south, okay? And bailing out the investors, they bailed out far more than depositors, they bailed out investors. That allows incumbent investors to share in any return on new activity in the economy. If they go through their failure, in fact they fail, okay, if they go through that and cleaned out, and then new investment, you see, enjoys the full return of any new activity. That's the heart of recovery. So we not only did something that people saw as unfair, I think far more work to help to create the period of low growth that we're in. And that's important that people, it's important that people understand if you're going to play the game of capitalism, you have to take losses as well as the gains. You don't privatize the profit and socialize the losses, okay? If you read Sheila Bair's book, Bull by the Horns, Sheila Bair was chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation during this period, the build up to we had this build up to the housing crisis and the decline. And she came in under the Bush administration as the chairman of the FDIC. And she presided over, on her watch, about 400 bank failures. These were small to medium-sized banks. Those banks, the assets were commonly, the institution didn't survive. The assets were awarded by bid to other banks, and no depositor lost any money. But investors took their hit, okay? If need be, the equity went to zero, and if necessary, bondholders got trimmed. And the depositors were made whole by the fact that assets were valuable enough, still valuable enough, given that equity was wiped out, plus any insurance of deposit, prepaid insurance account that the FDIC had, depositors were all made whole. The three largest banks escaped that, you see, and those smaller banks were put immediately cleaned up and put in a better position. And so that's failure and bankruptcy and good bankruptcy laws are a very important part of restoring equilibrium. See, in the old days, you had a far larger number of banks, and failure rates were pretty high. And of course, we created the Federal Reserve System to try to create a better system. You see that it would avoid all that cost, but we still got it with it because of the politics, okay? And in the United States, I don't know how it works over here, but I guess that's about the same. In the United States, secretaries of Treasury typically come from the investment banking community. Or if they don't come from it, that's where they go after they finish the treasury. So you can see. And it's a hard, difficult problem because the U.S. Treasury needs to be well informed. It needs the kind of experience that bankers have and investment bankers have. You see. So how do you get that experience into government decision making and activity without having essentially self-dealing?
During that phase, you also denounced the Clinton photo.
But anyway, I recommend the book too. Okay, and Sheila Bair's book is great because it's kind of a blow by blow of, and her problems with the other regulators in the government, you see. Yes.
Obviously, this is an interesting result for you. But I wonder which result would not be interesting. Let's assume one would keep everything or has the 12-12 solution. Like 100% of all ones would only choose the 12-12. That would be interesting too.
Yes.
Nobody would choose, or
Yes.
nobody would choose this solution, but everybody would give everything to 2 and let 2 decide. That would also be interesting. And on the next level, if all 2s would choose the 642 solution, that would be very interesting. But if all 2s would choose the other solution, that would be interesting too. What is the solution that is not interesting to publish?
I don't know, we hope to find them. And I hope nevertheless to bring them in and let them be published along with the others. Yes. And notice that in the original simpler game, we're able to interpret what people are doing in terms of reading each other pretty well. But in these other things, for example, as soon as we introduce a punishment option, people are, like in that first game where you can punish want of beneficence, people that move right are not anticipating that. You see, they're not able to read accurately because the change of the notes, the play is changing so much.
Over there.
So in a sense, one could understand your frequent variations as varying available signaling devices, signaling of particular intentions. And you are doing one-shot interactions.
Yes.
But in reality, of course, my ability to signal something about me interacts with the experience that the person I'm interacting with has done in the past.
Yeah.
And we might interact with many, many different people, and we might have a selective memory of what happened in the past and how I update basically my beliefs about my current encounter.
Yes.
So I would be really interested in seeing this run repeatedly in a stranger matching.
So would I.
And yeah, so
Let me go back
yeah.
to this game. Let's see, back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was published in PNAS in 1995. We ran games like this. They were a little bit bigger trees, but they had the same structure. And we did a one-shot, repeated the same partners, repeated with random rematching, repeated where she stayed in the same role, and we did them all these ways. In this game, by periods 15 to 20, 91% of the pairs are on the 18, the equivalent of the cooperative outcome. 91%, only 9%. They are, precisely because of the feedback they're talking about, they are getting there and they're getting. The 9% that are not, they're just stuck in punishment and going back and forth, and they can't put it together. And I think it helps a lot, though, that in the one-shot game, people start out this way.
Was it a partner matching or a stranger matching?
Oh, all of them, it was the same matching, but that was 91% versus 9. Yeah, then you get slippage.
Yeah.
And as you would expect, the greater the probability you're going to be rematched with the same person, the more there's cooperation. It's just just rank orders there. Okay.
I'm assuming you did these experiments with American friends. Do you think the outcomes of the experiments could vary on like where the people are from? Do you think they could be different if they were from Europe or if they were from Asia?
Oh, cultural differences. Well, some of these games, yes, are sensitive to those things, and of course, there's been a lot of these two-person games run to look at not only cultural differences among developed countries, but they've been run with extremely primitive societies which have very little contact with markets. And the shocker there is that in these groups that are more separated from markets, they're actually behaving in a more self-interested way. And the thought was that they wouldn't do that. But that's consistent with Smith's idea that we're all self-loving, and the groups that have done well for themselves have learned to trade and to create wealth, okay, and overcome those a lot of the deficiencies that they were started out with. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. There's one last
Oh, okay.
I would be interested whether your results also transfer to situations where you do not look at individuals, but rather whole countries. So if you, for example, think about the situation of this two-person game, having the two persons not being individuals, but countries, and looking at the situation in Europe with the Brexit, Great Britain basically turned right, now leaving the European Union, the opportunity to react, turning left or right. Is that something where you feel that the game theory could also help to give us at least a
yes,
sense
I think
of
it's a whole lot richer situation to model than is here. But I think that could be productive way. And it's interesting to see how Brexit works out. And of course, we're going through an election that's doesn't look like anything that I've seen in my lifetime in the United States. And a lot of it is coming from people that have a lot of fear, okay, and a lot of concerns, and they don't feel that whatever that system is out there has provided them with a lot of the opportunities and also protected them, and doesn't see it as protecting them from the fears they now have. And I've just been really disheartened to see the changes in American attitudes toward immigration. And of course, the evidence is massive about what made America was free migration. You know, it's Fortune 500 companies, all kinds of successful companies that are built by people that were born in the United States, or they're maybe second generation. So that's been a very vital source of what America is, and now we have a huge reaction to that, and we saw that in Brexit. Anyway, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Just for closing, we would like to give you something from Munich which Adam Smith could not yet get because he died before the Oktoberfest started. And so this is
Auch wenn es schon vorbei ist.